So, I mean, we've done these tastings for I can't remember how many years now. Always very good fun, though. The idea is largely to taste some of the newest things that are out on the market, things that I found in the last year that I found particularly of good quality or particularly innovative or and I've enjoyed. And so that's kind of the selection that we've got here today. It's nice to have all the bottles up here. That's rather fantastic. We've got 8 samples, and partly also they will look somewhat at the trends of what's going on in the drinks industry as well. So, lovely. That's right. I'll do them when they come out.
Right.
I'll
Whichever.
flourish. Oh, it's a note. Someone sent me a note. Thank you, Nicholas. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think it's been a year, and I will get into this in more detail when we go through with the tasting, but it's certainly been a year that I think there actually has been quite a lot of change from where we were last year, both in terms of what's on the market, and also what I will speak about is the approach that has been taken for certain products that are on the market as well. I think in the last year, partly due to things like the gin note, but there has definitely been a change in the way in which we are talking about gin, and I think that that's a good thing, because as gin is increasing in the varieties and the complexity available, I think that having a better way of talking about gin is a very important one. So we're still a lot of people waiting for samples, right? Okay, all right. Okay, well I'll have to reschedule. I'll have to move things around a little bit. So anyway. So how have things changed since last year? Well, we continue to see the rise of fruit gin or flavoured gin, however you might want to discuss it. This time last year, a lot of people and distillers I'd spoken to were not very fond of the phrase flavoured gin. They thought it was a bit of a sort of negative connotation. Now, I think partly because of flavoured vodka. That was kind of the reason. But necessity, with the greater range of gins that are on the market, has kind of led to that being more widely accepted as a term for some of the products we're going to taste today. And I think that that's a good thing, because I think there needs to be an understanding of a difference between something that is, completely distilled, very dry sort of gin, in comparison to one that might have some sort of fruit infusion or something like that. People, particularly those that were at the city debate, very enjoyable, as it was when we were talking about the gin boom, there was a lot of discussion about flavoured vodka and how flavoured vodka has died off. It depends where you are. I've just come back from Missouri, and I was in, as they call it, a liquor store called Friar Tuck, of all things, and they had twice as much flavoured vodka as they had gin. I mean, you've seen a picture of half of it, and it was... yes, please, yeah. There was what was it? A blueberry peach cobbler flavoured vodka, and another one which was called Dude. No, yeah, it was called Dude, and that was a Mountain Dew flavoured vodka. So, and that's quite new on the market. So this idea that flavoured vodka has disappeared is its death is exaggerated. Anyway, I think we're getting closer now to. We're getting there. So. Fruit gins continue to be popular. The other thing I think that's I've noticed as a trend for this year so far is ready-to-drinks. Great increase in the number of ready-to-drinks, largely premixed gin tonics, not exclusively, but there's a lot more on the market. Sipsmith have brought theirs out. Chillgrove, both very good examples, actually. Fever Tree have brought 3 out quite recently, and that boutique gin company will have a range of different, some gin tonics, some other things that are coming out probably in a couple of weeks, I would have thought. And that's also something that you're seeing in the US and further abroad as well. So this idea of this element of convenience as well with drinking, I think. And actually, finally we're getting some that are, I mean, there's always been a couple that have been okay, but I think the quality of those is increasing dramatically. And I think generally that's what I see with gin as well. I think that the quality is generally increasing. I do a lot of judgings of competitions, and I know there's a number of other judges here, and I think the times where we were getting stuff that was truly undrinkable, that is definitely declining, and we are getting, generally the quality is much better. People are getting the basics right, which I think is very important. How are we for samples? Who's not got samples? We're here. Marvellous. Right, let's have the first sample. So, this is Mason's G12. Masons are still about. They are still going. Interestingly, I decided to include this before the fire there, and so it's good. It's a good one to be starting off with. It did mean that Nicholas had to go to Aldi to go and pick up the bottle. So this is their botanically rich. This is, and it leads very nicely on to what Ben was talking about. This is Mason's first foray into the multi-shot method of gin. It's their classic style and bold and intense. And you should, if I get this right. Oh, it's this clicker, isn't it? Sorry. There we go. There we go. Yes. So very sort of classic botanicals, juniper and basil, lime. Well, juniper and the basil and lime as well in there. So very bright and fresh, accessible, designed to be. It's very much a sort of everyday, every man's kind of gin style. Works very well, gin tonic and martinis and all that sort of thing. So I think it's a nice one to start with because it's got a good botanical intensity and it just kind of sets the scene for gin. And that's good starting for a gin tasting, I'd say. Right. Thoughts on this one? Anyone? Lime's definitely coming through, yep. Yeah, I think there's got that limey sort of aspect to it coming through. But I think that makes it, very good for long drinks, and you can just put some soda with it or something like that. So we then move on to Alfred the Great, another dead king. Here we go. So this is from Wessex Distillery. This is, many of you may know Jonathan, who was previously at City of London. This is now his new distillery where he's working. It's a very, very attractive bottle that you've got here. Gold at the IWSC as well, it's very nice. So again, this is 41.3. Again, designed to be a very sort of classic gin, maybe a little bit more towards on the citrus there as well. So kind of the reason for wanting to have these gins in the tasting is to show that, yes, and we will come on to some of the fruit gins and things. As you can see when you look at the colours in your little palette of gin there. Also, don't spill it on yourself because some of them are really sticky, so just watch out. But this is also to show that even though there are these other styles of gin that are popular, there are still people who are honing the craft of making a very good, classic London dry gin, and it's not everything. Whilst that might be what a lot of people are speaking about with fruit gins and things like that, there's still a lot of the traditional things still going on. People haven't totally forgotten what gin is, which I think is good. Thoughts on this one? Anyone? Very quiet this morning. Not had enough gin, I don't think. Tom?
Yeah, there is a nice bit of spice. Quite light on the nose, isn't it?
It's always interesting, and again, finding this as a spirits judge, the idea of the nose on gin. Because with some competitions, that's like something that's very prized, and you need to have the nose and everything there. And certainly you can tell a lot from the nose. But if the nose is quite quiet, which is kind of a way of saying that there's not a huge amount on the nose. It doesn't necessarily mean that as a gin it's going to be bad, because, I mean, how many people are drinking the gin on its own to enjoy the bouquet? Not many. So, when it works well with, gin tonic or in a Negroni or whatever, if it works well as a gin, then I think that that's sufficient. But it's just kind of a side point on nosing and things like that. So, something else that we're starting to see a little bit more of is botanical spirits. And I think, so these are made like a gin, but are not gin. They've been around for a long time, probably about 10 years. There's been people doing it in the US. And then, of course, you've got things like aquavit and absinthe, which are kind of in that area anyway. But finally, we're starting to see things that at some point in time might have just been called gin, but they weren't really very ginny. But actually now people are starting to embrace botanical vodkas. Because, I mean, like, if you make, say, a really cracking lemon verbena distillate, that's going to be a lovely product, and it work very well in lots of drinks, and work very well in drinks that typically would work well with gin. But if it's got no juniper in it, it's not gin. And I've certainly spoken to some people who've made something a bit like that, and I'm kind of like, well, if you want to call it gin, you probably should put some more juniper in it, or you could call it botanical vodka, and they've kind of just gone with the gin and not bothered to put the extra juniper in it. But it's nice to actually see that there seems to be more of a place for these botanical spirits. And I think that's a good way, and as people that are interested in gin and wanting to encourage and to some extent protect what gin is, I think it's important to encourage the alternative homes for these products that might be considered not necessarily being gin. And so we have an example of the third sample. So this is not a gin. I know it's unusual for gin tasting to have a product that is not a gin. But this is from a gin company. This is from Moreland Spirit. They make Heppel gin. This is their Douglas Fir vodka at 41%. This just uses Douglas Fir. It's the only botanical in there. And it is made via pot distillation of that, vacuum distillation, and supercritical extraction, which is where they'll get some Douglas Fir, they get some CO2, they chill it down to this sort of phase state, so it sort of has some of the properties of liquid and some of the properties of gas, and then they force it through the Douglas Fir, and then you get this very concentrated flavour that comes from it. So this is the Douglas Fir. Yes. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yes, this is the Douglas Fir here. So, I think actually and it's also another a nice example of how with even just one botanical, you can have quite a complex flavour in there. There are floral notes and there are herbal notes, and there's some things that do somewhat approach juniper. I mean, because of that connection between the two. There's also like sort of sweet, almost like a sort of fennel kind of thing I'm getting coming through there. What do people think of this? And then I know it's not gin, but what do people think? Yeah, and I think there are times where you might find a botanical, particularly when you're experimenting, and you might think this botanical works really well on its own, but it might not necessarily work with in a gin with other botanicals. And I kind of guess when you see a product like this, and I think this is excellent, it's a nice example to say, actually, there is an alternative. It is something that's starting to get recognised. Because someone's got to make that first move, right? And it is always daunting. You think, if I put botanical vodka on it, who's going to know what it's going to be? Will the shop know where they're going to put it? And there's all these kind of things. But gradually, now we start to see a few on the market. Hopefully, I think that's something to encourage, personally. Right. So, we now move on to a new one from Bombay Sapphire English Estate. So it takes their core botanicals, as everything up to the grains of paradise here, but then adds pennyroyal mint, rosehip, and hazelnut. And these are kind of inspired by the flavours of Hampshire, which has someone that was born and bred in Hampshire. I mean, there's some good flavours to have, but there's some other less pleasant ones, I'm sure, that you could have in Hampshire. But yes, and this is it's one of the one of the examples that I can think of where this aspect of terroir, which is something that I've been talking about here and we've been talking about in gin for a long time, has actually now kind of filtered its way up in some respects to one of the larger distilleries, and there's also the sort of an aspect of embracing that here. So let's have a little taste of this one. This is at 41%, so it's a little bit stronger than Bombay Sapphire in the UK, or a little bit weaker of the Bombay Sapphire if you're in the US. So one of the reasons, and part of the reason why I've chosen this, is that there's the botanicals that Bombay Sapphire has as well, but these 3 extra ones that are in there, I think it's a rare example of where actually you can, when something's been changed, you can taste all 3 of those individual things. You get that buttery nuttiness, you get that rosehip thing, you get some of the mint. You also get like a little bit of like myrcene as well, so like that slight sort of green cannabis sort of flavour. So obviously it's not in there, but some bits of Southampton, some bits of Portsmouth for sure. Anyway, sorry, I was just being a little. It's only because Anne's here, that's why I was just being a bit outrageous. But thoughts on this one?
Are they in the strength or like in the quantities with the Tonica listed?
No.
You can get
Yeah, they're just listed in order of the order in which I remembered them. Again, I think works because of that mint. You're getting that slightly cooling element, and I think again that's something that will work and lend itself very well to anything that you want to have that's very refreshing, because you've already got like a inbuilt cooling aspect to that. But also, like I think because of the hazelnut, perhaps with that texture, it does make it is actually quite nice to sip neat, and potentially like with a few ice cubes, I can actually kind of see that being a bit of a sipper, which is very pleasant. And then we move on to our selection of sweeter gins. There we go. As I said, the term is now far more widely accepted than it was. I think there's been a desire for clarity from all sort of stakeholders, if you like, in gin. And I think that certainly last year we saw a great discussion about what gin is and what it's not. And I think that has helped, that discussion has helped to lead to things like some of the fruit gins and that, having terms that can be understood and accepted. This is new from the Isle of Wight in their new, very fancy bottle, I must say. Very, very attractive. Very, very new. Is it not yet launched, right? An exclusive for Ginposium. So this is made with fresh strawberries, made on the Isle of Wight. This is 38%, and this is using local misshapen fruit, is that right? Yeah, so this is a nice example of, because certainly for a lot of these gins where they're made via infusion of fruit, the fruit doesn't need to look perfect to do that. So it's actually, for those distillers who might have sources of fruit locally, this is actually a really nice idea, because you can, rather than that just going to be composted or just wasted, you can use it for something like this. And I think actually, in addition, that's another good story that you can kind of tell when you're trying to sell your products as well. And depending on how much fruit you have, it might be something that is only distributed very, very locally, or even at your distillery. But again, that's something else that you can talk about, and you've got other, good relations with other businesses. It's a bit like what Ben was talking about with the sort of food hub where you are. Having that relationship between other businesses, I think, is really good. So let's have a look taste of this one. So very bright, fragrant strawberries on the nose there, and then I think that kind of follows through. Very balanced on the sweetness. There's some sweetness towards the end, but I think it's not too heavy there, and I think there's some nice vanilla notes as well. Really, really nice in just a gin and tonic. Just works very, very well in that. And I think like when you have different levels of sugar in that in different gins, you've kind of got to balance out what's the right mixer. But for something like this, where it is just the tonic, works very well. So, anyone's thoughts on this one? Leon, your thoughts on this one as you were talking whilst I was talking? Encouraging. Okay, so. Just for those people that know me, I just keep banging on about it. I've just come back from Missouri in the US, and it was interesting to see kind of their take on fruit gins and things, and their general their view on gin. So I was out there for Gin Week, which is in St. Louis. It's a whole week of gin events and then kind of a tasting at the end. It's a lady, Natasha Barami, who's a member of the Gin Guild. She's out there waving the flag for gin out there. And one of the things, when I was in part of a number of tastings and talks and things like that, and one of the things that I had seen was, first off, the people that were in, and most of those people came from St. Louis or the surrounding area, they were like really into their gin. It was really quite, and like the level of knowledge and engagement they had was really, really strong. And I thought, like, because you often think about San Francisco or New York or Los Angeles or somewhere like that, and they are the big markets. But here, like, there was... people were very much into it. And the other thing I noticed was that they tend to have something of a sweet tooth. So I spent a bit of time with a friend of mine who's one of the brand ambassadors for Sipsmith, and it was their slow gin. Their slow gin was what everyone was interested in. And a lot of people hadn't really tried slow gin before, or either the slow gin that they could get in the US, the sort of domestic stuff is sort of sugar and flavour and alcohol. It's not what we would know of as a slow gin. And so they tended to be, there was a sweet tooth. They had the Hendrick's Midsummer, which was quite fruity and floral, very, very popular. But what I noticed was a lot of the local distilleries, anything that they did that was even vaguely towards that was very, very dry. So it's kind of like there was this great demand for these flavours, but it wasn't being served by the local market as it was. So the boom in pink gin that we have here is not like it is over there. It's still very much in its infancy, but I think that there's the flavour profile's there, and I think that they're still interested in that kind of thing. So what are we doing on? Okay, right. We move forward to the next one, which is the Warner's Raspberry Gin at 40%. So it's based on the... What? We missed one. Ah, my cards are in the wrong order. My apologies. Sorry to everybody. All right, well, nevertheless, let's do... I put them in the wrong order. That's my fault. Let's do the seventh one first. So those of you that tasted the other one, you should have waited until I said, you see. Number 7. This is the Warner's Raspberry Gin. So this is based on their London Dry Gin. There's been a sort of some slight adjustments made to the gin, so but still very good. I liked it when it first came out, and it's still very, very good. This is infused with raspberry, blackberries, and elderflower. What's nice about this is it's kind of, I would describe it as a sort of holistic approach to raspberry. So yes, it's called raspberry gin, but when you taste it, these other elements that have come into it kind of help to boost that flavour profile up. So let's have a taste of that. Again, I think this is an example of a gin where it's definitely raspberry, but it's definitely gin. You kind of have... I think the Mermaid one was dry and slightly on the dry side, and I think there's a real place for that. This is kind of like that equilibrium between the fruit and the gin, I think, which I think is very good. We now skip back to the Cotswolds one. So this is their Hedgerow Gin. So that is their their dry gin, but with sloes, jams, and bullace and blackberry. So this is sample number 6. And so they do that in an infusion. So it's quite similar in many ways to the Warner Edwards one. The Warner's raspberry gin. But then it's been finished in some of their red wine casks, their STR casks. So I think this is an example of how people are starting to think about different ways that you can age gin, and I think it's kind of why I've illustrated it. Because for a long time, aged gin was just ex-bourbon cask, and it's not particularly exciting. I don't think it works necessarily that well either. So, but this is something else that's been done. So you get some of those woody, spicy notes being added to the fruit. And then also, what's interesting is what will you do with the down? What will you do with the cask when you're done with it? Because the things that you could do are very interesting. There's Spirit Works in California. They do a sloe gin, and then they do a barrel reserve sloe gin, and then they do a rye whiskey finished in the sloe gin barrel, and that is just fantastic. So, also doing products like this, you can sort of one product can feed into another. And well, yes, right. Okay. And then, yeah, I think this is just, it's very simple. And again, it's a slightly different approach to the fruit gin as well. So I think it's part of your like distillery exclusive kind of experimental thing, but it's really cool. So that's great. And then finally, because we're running out of time, I think, aren't we? 5 minutes, right. We jump to this last one. So this is a gin liqueur. There's been a lot of talk about gin liqueurs, and to some extent, they have been used as a way of trying to have gins that are not at full strength and that are sweetened be sold as gin. Erroneously. This is a creme de juniper. It's based on an old product that existed some time ago. I found it when I was doing the research for Forgotten Spirits and Long-Lost Liqueurs. It is a creme. It is 250 grams of sugar per litre to make it a creme, like a creme de menthe or a creme de mure. It is sweet. It's generally designed so that you can use it kind of as a modifier for your cocktail as opposed to potentially necessarily as the base. That said, if you have this sort of 1 to 3 parts with ruby grapefruit juice and shake it, it is fantastic and tastes like marmalade on toast. It's bizarre, but that's what it tastes like. It's only made with juniper. It's 46%, and it's aged in a ex-wheat whiskey barrel. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. So and then it's been aged for a little bit of time because that was also part of what was going on. So this is very much, essentially it's a juniper liqueur, but technically also is a gin. And I think it's quite nice to see a product that is trying to capture actually what a gin liqueur can be and kind of bring that back. And it's not necessarily about really, really low ABV, very fruity stuff that is just a way of trying to get the gin in there because it's trendy. It's also very nice to see the Hayman's gin liqueur come back as well in its new format, which is great. And another example of something that has the botanical complexity, but is also a liqueur as well. And this is from Sevastopol in California. So it's just sort of Napa sort of area. And these are the same people that make the sloe gin that's barrel-aged and then the rye whiskey. And this is a boutique as well. So, yeah, that's about it. Any questions? So this, it kind of fits where generally more like sort of where liqueurs would fit. So I would maybe look at this as if you were making a cocktail, rather than using maybe simple syrup or something like that, you might want to use this because this will add some extra juniper complexity and that woody element as well. But then there are certain drinks that you can have it on its own with as well. Part of the reason for doing it is boutique like to do slightly crazy stuff, and it was a historical thing, and Lauren, who's the distiller here, is very much into looking at historical liqueurs and things like that. So when they were looking at a project to work with them on, this seemed like quite an obvious one for it. What do people think of it? I mean, it's difficult to taste it on its own because it's... Yeah. The complex, I mean, yeah, I think like she's done when we started the project, I was concerned about two things. One thing was, is just being juniper going to be complex enough? That was one of my concerns. And the other thing was, if we put all of this sugar, and it's a lot of sugar, put in it, is it going to just be too much? Is it not going to work? And yes, it's really, really sweet, but I think it's still, I still think it actually all comes together quite nicely. It's about 3 or 4 months. And in addition to that, just because it's boutique-y and we want to do bizarre things, hold on a second, come on. Right. In the distillery, they have barrels that have headphones on them. And they age some of their whiskey listening to music. It's just kind of something that's fun that they do for people that visit. So you can taste the barrels with the that have had the music played to them and that haven't had the music played to them. For this one, depends on once you're there for 6 months, you get to choose a playlist for it. So the music we played to this was a playlist of songs that have the word gin in them. There's a lot. And that's what we did. Just because it was a bit of fun, that was part of what they're doing as their distillery, and so we thought, well, I mean, it's there, right? So I can't see why you wouldn't. And that was kind of the reason. I guess, if any difference it makes, it's about the vibrations that are there, but I think it's probably quite minimal. But it is quite fun, and that is kind of the reason why you've got this kind of sound studio in the background there, and you've got the barrel with the MP3 player on it. Yeah, I didn't get all these out. But anyway, there it is there. Lovely, thank you very much.